Hi guys. Happy Friday. Here we are at the end of the week. We've spent this week talking about and practicing setting, especially in terms of using imagery to create that setting, and not just to describe what the setting looks like, but really to create an experience of that setting. So, those physical sensations, using verbs to create physical sensations, that are emotionally appropriate. That's what we were practicing yesterday with yesterday's writing, was really not just creating those physical sensations, but emotionally appropriate, making sure that what we were doing was going to really be emotionally appropriate for the story that we might end up telling. And again, I know that some of you may not know what that story is yet. You may just have a setting, and others of you may feel like I'm holding you back a little bit and making you go a little bit slow, but this is all really good practice so that when we actually do get to the story, you have a really good grounding sensation of, or sense of, where the story is taking place, so that when you start putting characters in it and those characters start doing their thing, they're doing it in a way that really is genuine to the setting that you're creating with your story. So today we're going to take all of this week's material about setting and verbs and emotions and imagery, and we're going to talk about how that is creating tone. And I've even got a funny little pun for you. So the title here is Setting the Right Tone with Your Imagery, right? Since we've been talking about creating the setting, but we're also setting the tone with our imagery. I thought that was kind of funny. If you don't think it's funny, that's fine. You can just let me have a nice little chuckle, but maybe one or two of you think it's funny as well. So as with the others, I want you to pause now and get ready for notes if you're not ready for notes yet, and I'll see you on the next slide. So tone is one of those things that is really important, but it operates almost in the background. Like we don't necessarily think about tone a lot when we're writing or when we're reading, unless we're Englishy nerds, and it's one of those things that's constantly crossing our minds. Otherwise, it might just be one of those things that is there, but we definitely, almost everybody will notice it when it's wrong. And so the reason that we should care about tone and what tone is so that we hit the right tone with our writing, so that people aren't thrown off by it. There's a lot of people who won't notice your tone unless they specifically think about it, if it's right. But everybody's going to notice your tone when they think about it if it's wrong. And this is directly related to the emotional stuff that we were talking about yesterday and the day before. So what is tone? Tone is the way the writer feels about a subject of their writing. So that could be how the writer feels about a setting, or how the writer feels about a character, or how the writer feels about an idea in their writing. But it's really important that you understand that it's not the way that the reader feels, it's the way that the writer feels. It's the emotion that the writer is feeling toward this thing. So we're going to talk about tone just in regards of how the writer feels about the place that they're describing, right? Um, and anyway, I'll leave it at that. It obviously is affected by the imagery that you choose to include. You as the writer are the person who's creating this place, right? This place and time, since setting is also, it's not just where, but it's also when. But the things that the writer is choosing to include, the way that the writer is choosing to have you respond emotionally with their imagery and verbs, is really important to kind of telling us how the writer feels about this place. And so you really need to understand how you feel about the story and the place that you're talking about. If you hit the wrong tone, it can cause what I'm calling discord in the reader's experience. So if you aren't clear on your tone, or if it's changing or waffling for no good reason, or it doesn't have consistency, then the person who's reading what you're writing is going to be confused and possibly not even, and a lot of times won't enjoy the experience of reading something. And the whole point of fiction really is to create an experience that the reader uh, can enjoy, and it means that the writer has to be consistent with their tone. Um, if the writer is consistent with how they feel about a place or about a person or about a thing, if they're consistent with their tone, then the reader is going to feel much more comfortable there. And it doesn't mean that the reader won't have negative emotions. It just means that the reader will feel comfortable with the fact that those negative emotions are there because it's obviously the way that the writer wants them to feel. So if we think about the examples that we've looked at, the first example that we looked at on Monday was the setting of the Salinas River Valley and of Mice and Men. And it was, very peaceful, and there were lots of animal tracks, and it was kind of quiet, and we had the constant life and movement of this place. That we get the sense that John Steinbeck, when he wrote of Mice and Men, really, truly, deeply believed that there was peace to be found in the Salinas Valley. And so that's his tone, right? Above everything, John Steinbeck loves the Salinas Valley. He loves the nature of it, the movement of it, the sensations of it, right? I know that, yes, bad things happen in Of Mice and Men. Terrible things happen to Lenny and to George and to Curly's wife and to all of these things. But underlying all of that is this sense of peace that John Steinbeck finds in the Salinas Valley, that he really does love this place. And so when Lenny dies at the end of the story, there's closure in that, right? Because Lenny dies kind of looking out over the beauty of this place that John Steinbeck, the author, loves. And despite the fact that it's a terrible way for Lenny to go out, we also understand that John Steinbeck doesn't think that this is the worst thing that could have happened to Lenny. Like it definitely could have been worse. So, and John Steinbeck's tone toward the Salinas River Valley is really consistent through the entire time. No matter what, it's a place of just like this immense beauty in life, um, that he really does love and appreciate. If we think about the tone toward the setting that George Orwell writes about in 1984, this is the example that we looked at on Wednesday, we really get this sense that George Orwell does not like this place, that this is not a place that George Orwell would like to be. It's unfriendly, it's unforgiving, it's painful to some extent. If you were to read more of this book, you would find out that that it's the setting is a source of constant suffering for everybody who lives there. And it's a place to be escaped as much as one can. And so we know that the writer, that this is not a place that the writer is going that George Orwell, the author, is going to want us um, to care to visit, right? Whereas John Steinbeck, despite all the bad things that happen in his book, would love for you to go see the Salinas River Valley. George Orwell is basically saying, like, this is not a place that you want to go. Like, I'm describing this because you're supposed to be having all these negative reactions to it, because I don't personally like it. So let's look at one more example. This one is from something that we've read this year. Early in the year, we read the short vignette, What Happened During the Ice Storm. And this is from the beginning of that, as the author is establishing the setting. So it says, one winter there was a freezing rain. How beautiful, people said when things outside started to shine with ice. But the freezing rain kept coming. Tree branches glistened like glass, then broke like glass. Ice thickened on windows until everything outside blurred. Farmers moved their livestock into the barns, and most animals were safe, but not the pheasants. Their eyes froze shut. And so as he's establishing this setting, he's doing a couple of things. We can see where he's creating these physical sensations. We especially get the physical sensation of touch, right, and sight. So we get the sensation of the cold, but we also get the sensation of this kind of cold beauty of the place, right? Like we can see the ice. We can see the ice building on the windows. We can even to some extent hear the ice shattering the tree branches, right? And so we get this overwhelming sense of physical sensations of coldness and sight and maybe a little bit of sound as well. What that leads to is both excitement and apprehension, at least the way that I see it, right? People are excited about this, that this is, not something that happens, that this is not something that we see or experience very often. But in that excitement, it also leads to apprehension that we don't know exactly what to expect from it. And so when things start breaking, that maybe is a bit of a surprise to us. We also get that excitement and apprehension when the farmers start, taking care of their livestock and making sure that their livestock are safe. But the apprehension of the pheasants and the pheasants being kind of stuck out there with their eyes frozen shut builds also that sense of apprehension for us. That underlying all of this excitement is the apprehensiveness of, well, what is going to happen? And what that creates in us is the sense that, the author feels that toward this place that, despite everything, we have to expect the worst. That this is that it's unforgiving, right? Like the way that he feels toward this place is that despite everything, despite our excitement, that we have to pay attention to this apprehension, that we can't just take it and say like, ooh, that's really pretty, but that we also have to recognize that it's something that could be dangerous to us, and that despite beauty, there's also a sense of danger there is really important, and we really kind of pick up on that throughout. And what I'd like you to notice is that it's a bit of a journey, right? Like rarely do we feel one thing, right? We're feeling a couple of things here. It's important that we feel both excitement and apprehension, that we sense both the beauty and the deadliness of it, because those two things really bounce off of each other. So if you're able to create this more complex emotion with your setting, that in itself is going to help you create a livelier experience for your readers. So now that you have had the experience of just describing the setting, you've used verbs to hopefully do some practice with your imagery. You've really focused on creating the type of emotional experience for your readers. What I'd like you to consider as we move forward into next week is the imagery and the setting that you've established, are you also taking an appropriate tone? Is it clear how you feel about this place? Not just how it feels to be there, but how you feel about this place. Is it clear that you love this place, or that you're worried about this place, or that you are apprehensive about this place? So the setting itself has its own feeling, but then you have your own tone that you're taking toward the setting. Is it clear that you feel a certain way toward it? And if not, should you make any changes? If there are changes, I encourage you to make those changes over the weekend so that you can be even clearer as next week we move into putting characters into our setting and allowing those characters to interact with the setting a bit more. Enjoy your weekend, and I look forward to seeing what we do next week.